What really makes something unique? What makes something iconic? What is there in something, what is there in a picture? What is there in any picture I've done that makes it very special? I don't know the answer. You don't always know that you have caught the moment in a photograph. There are many times when you really think you've come away with a fantastic picture, and then when you look at it, it's not there. And then there are other times when you're extremely lucky and something which you had never realized at the moment that you took the picture as something that really would make a great image turns out to be a fantastic image. Basically, a lot of people seem to think of me now as a movie photographer. And actually, I got into movies in a totally accidental way. I was doing a story for Look magazine on Dustin Hoffman while he was working on Midnight Cowboy. And I did a picture which became the logo or the ad for Midnight Cowboy and became a picture that a lot of people have seen since then. And consequently, at that time, the movie studios felt if we can get someone who works a lot for magazines to do pictures on our set, then we can get like 6 or 8 pages or 4 pages in a magazine, which is free publicity, which is much cheaper than having to pay for putting ads, and it's also more personal.
Not bad, not bad for a cowboy.
I feel like I want to ask you some questions. When we met on Midnight Cowboy, which was '69, I think, how long had you been photographing?
I had been photographing since 1960, 61.
How old were you when you started?
I was about, in terms of professional photography, I was about in my late 20s, really.
Yeah, I think it's very rare that you can be in a film and go through the rigors of making it and, making the choices with the director. This is right, that's wrong, whatever. And then finishing the film, and then they cut it, and then they release it, and then you see a still. To see something that encapsulates the entire movie, almost like a haiku poem, is unusual. And I think this is certainly at the top of the list of any film that I've done, where you have one image and it's the movie.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here! Hey, listen, don't get sore or anything, okay? I don't think I can walk anymore. I'm scared. You know what they do to you when they find out that you can't walk.
I think it was Life magazine, or maybe it was Look, I don't know which one. I think it was Life, came out right after Midnight Cowboy, and they had on the cover of it it was taken from probably your photograph, but there were 2 images on the cover of the magazine. One was of John Wayne, and one was of me as Ratso. And the title of the article was A Choice of Heroes. And that's exactly the transition that you caught, which I must say Time magazine did also. 1969, and there's a transition being made from the hero to the anti-hero. And that was the beginning of it, I think.
I'm Joe Buck from Texas. Enrico Rizzo from the Bronx. His name is Joe Buck. He's a cowboy. Just came in from Texas.
You were gonna ask me for money? How much is this gonna cost me?
$20.
You big Texas longhorn bull.
No rich lady with any class at all buys that cowboy crap anymore.
Huh?
Frankly, you're beginning to smell. And for a stud in New York, that's a handicap.
Well, this is Midnight Cowboy, and this, I think, is an iconic photo that they used in advertising. I think I have a dim memory of this not being during a scene, but you photographing me and saying, just put your head around the post there.
Very possible.
I think so. And what's interesting, and you told me where to look, because what's interesting about it is the cigarette is unlit. And you probably said, can you just put the cigarette in your mouth? You don't have to light it. Maybe. But I think you staged this in a very documentary kind of fashion. And it became the iconic photo from Midnight Cowboy.
Cool.
So good work.
Everybody's talking at me. I don't hear a word they're saying, only the echoes of my mind.
Particularly in America, the most you could aspire to be was a Life magazine photographer, because Life was such an important medium. It's the way millions of people really got their sense of the news or what was happening in the world. Everybody loved Life, and also there was so much prestige in terms of Life photographers that if you were interested in photojournalism, that was the way to go. I went to Arkansas and I spent 4 weeks photographing migrant workers. And the New York Times used one of the pictures as the cover on the New York Magazine section of the Times, which was, you know, a great thing for a budding photographer to suddenly happen, and it only inspired you to do more. I did a whole series of photographs on addiction in East Harlem. And then I worked constantly for Life magazine from that point on, as well as other magazines. So I did covers for New York magazine. I did covers for Time magazine, Newsweek, the Saturday Evening Post, all kinds of magazines. And it really established me. In 1963, I had an assignment to photograph Jack Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy at the airport meeting the Shah of Iran. And I really was from New York, and the Washington Press Corps really comes to any kind of an event. If an event is only going to take 4 minutes, they're there half an hour or an hour before. And at that point, all the magazines and news outlets were competitive, and so everyone's pushing and shoving each other and really forming a line. And they had decided that Jackie Kennedy would stand right close to the photographers. It was a photographic opportunity. So all these photographers were bunched there. I came a little late. So what I did was, since I'm not incredibly tall, I crept under everyone's legs. And everyone's hitting me on the head and all over. And I started taking pictures from a low angle and got very good pictures. What was great about working for Life magazine was you always worked with a reporter, and your stories would take anywhere from 4 days to 6 months. And as a photographer, you could either involve yourself in the conversation, or else you could be totally a fly on the wall, just looking for those moments and for that emotional moment that would make a great picture. When I worked on the Selma March, there were 3 photographers who photographed pretty much the same sequence. There was a black student who had "Vote" written on his forehead, and a photographer named Bruce Davidson took a wide picture, and you have this student with "Vote" on his forehead, and there's a lot of other things happening. Right behind him is this American flag, and there's a black student standing right in front of the American flag. And so his picture is capturing all of this. What I did was I saw this image of this student with "Vote," and I did a close-up image because it wasn't the scene itself that interested me as much as the whole spirit and what the spirit and this movement was about. And to me, that was conveyed by the look in his eyes, by this sign on his forehead, and just this serious look. So basically you had 3 photographers photographing at the same moment, or basically the same time period, the same scene, and each of them had a totally different point of view of what was important and what would make a strong photograph. Lenses, speeds of film, and all of that isn't what's essential to being a photographer. What's essential is that unique point of view which we all have, and trying to do things with that sense of yourself, and also of doing things you really care about. And to me, those are the 2 main elements of becoming really a good photographer. What's interesting about this photograph is, as the Selma March was approaching Montgomery, Alabama, Andrew Young was very fearful that someone might try to take a sniper shot at Martin Luther King. And what he did was he asked everyone who had a dark suit to come in the front row. Now, you had a lot of celebrities there who were anxious to be in that front row entering Montgomery, and they did not understand what was happening. But it was basically that Andrew Young had decided that if anyone tries to take a sniper shot at Martin Luther King, they would not be able to tell which of these people was Martin Luther King, and he would have a safety factor involved.
We shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. And with this faith, we will go out and adjourn the councils of despair and bring new light into the dark chambers of pessimism. And we will be able to rise from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope. And this will be a great America. We will be the participants in making it so. And so as I leave you this evening, I say, walk together, children. Don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the corner.
What happened was, when he was shot, I was in New York, and Life magazine asked me to fly immediately to Memphis, Tennessee. He had been at the Lorraine Motel, and a sniper had shot him. I first went to the boarding house room where the shots had been fired from, and they had been fired from a second-floor bathroom. And apparently the assailant had stood in the middle of the bathtub, had leveled his gun on the windowsill, and I noticed that there was a dirty handprint on the wall, a black, greasy handprint, and it could only have been made by someone standing in that bathtub. And I photographed it, and actually Life ran it as a full page the next week. And then I went over to the motel in the room, and I saw on a ledge his attaché case, and above that was a television set. And suddenly on the television set, behind the commentator, the image of Martin Luther King appeared. And for the first time, I suddenly saw this as a unit, and I photographed the whole scene. And to me, it became a very important picture. There's a great photographer, Alfred Eisenstadt, who was really one of the sweetest people you ever met, and also a great photographer for Life magazine. He started actually in Germany, and in 1933, really at the start of the whole Nazi movement, he photographed Goebbels, who was Hitler's information minister. And Goebbels was sitting there in a very stiff chair, very upright, and he had an aide looking down on him. He was wearing a dark black suit, and he just had this demonic look on his face, looking forward at everyone, and very, very stiff. But 15 minutes before, Eisenstadt had done the smiling picture of Goebbels. So what happened was, he brought these pictures to Henry Luce, who was editor of Time magazine. And Henry Luce had a choice of which picture to use, either this picture of Goebbels looking demonic or this friendly picture, which was going to influence millions of people as to how they felt about the start of the Nazi movement. Henry Luce decided to do the picture of the stiff one, which became a classic image. But it just shows you a picture is not truth.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
In the 1960s, I traveled with Bobby Kennedy. I did his campaign posters, and he was a person who everybody loved. He was a very complicated person. I've always said there's no way you could ever show the entire life of Robert Kennedy in photographs. He was extremely complicated, but he was the best politician I've ever met, in the sense that he had a keen sense of intelligence, he had a sense of caring, and he knew how to play politics. He also had a little bit of charisma. But all those things, to my mind, are essential for a politician. And most politicians have one or two of those, but very rarely do they have all three. The thing about Bobby was he never expected to be in the forefront. He always thought he would be in the back room. He was an important advisor to Jack Kennedy, the president. He became Attorney General. Basically, he could handle politics, and he was probably the smartest of all the Kennedy brothers. Most of Robert Kennedy's campaign stops were in places that were too small to hold the crowd, so that you would always have an overflowing crowd. And in all his ways, he knew how to make news, or how to get his point across, and how to express it. We were in Berkeley, California, and I had done this picture of Bobby talking to this enormous crowd of people. Politics is very interesting. It's image and charisma that dictate so much. It's the way a person looks and the way he talks which become more important than his ideas. Bobby had all of that going for him. I was at their house on the last Christmas before Robert Kennedy was killed. And it was just Bobby at home. It was a family. It was just a whole family life. And it wasn't thought of that, well, we have to do this in a particular way and be very careful how we present it to the press and what we show and how they're going to react to that. It's totally different. I mean, everything is so calculated at this point that basically it's almost hard to do the photography that was so easy to do at that time. And it was an amazing experience because the room was filled with stuff. I mean, because you have all these kids, and all these kids had presents and all, and everyone's running around finding stuff. And one of the brothers had given him a green beret to wear, you know, just as a present. But it was a very moving experience.
We did about 10 years ago, we did a big book on Muhammad Ali. Steve was on an assignment for Sports Illustrated in 1963. So that was a few years after he won the gold medal, and he became the big new loudmouth star. And the assignment was they had a trip from Louisville, Kentucky to New York City in Cassius Clay's car. And Cassius Clay was at that time at the height of his confidence.
I got there and Muhammad Ali was just this relaxed guy, extremely polite in every way, and all the kids in the neighborhood absolutely loved him. They would play with him, they would ride their bikes with him. He loved to play Monopoly. And so he played Monopoly with the kids, and he would go all over town carrying his Monopoly set under his arm. And I played Monopoly with him, and he didn't want me to lose, because if I lost, some of my property would go back to the bank. And so he kept loaning me money, so that eventually he would win absolutely everything on the board, and he would be the supreme winner. I photographed all the kids playing with him, and a few months ago, I got this letter, this email, and it was from Lonnie Ali, his wife. And what she said is that she had this photograph which had been given to her 40 years ago, and it's on her wall, and it was a picture in which she was in the picture with Muhammad Ali, and she was one of the kids. You can see their eye contact is like really direct. Each of them are looking right intensely at the other one. There are all these other kids around, but what you see is this enormous emotion between them. This is a girl who is 9.5 years old with pigtails, and Muhammad Ali, who at the time was 19 years old. And this electricity just happened. And when she was 19 years old, she decided she was going to marry Muhammad Ali. Basically, when I'm working, I really like to be a fly on the wall.
Yes.
And I like to be very quiet because I feel I don't want to interfere with anyone's personality. In other words, I want to capture the spirit of whoever I'm photographing. And if I get into a conversation, then you're thinking about me, and I don't want you to do that.
Well, I don't remember you ever being in my eye line, so to speak. So
No, I was really careful.
yeah.
You know, the other thing is that on a movie set, the still photographer is the low man on the totem pole.
That's right.
And basically the director figures, hey, he's not helping production. There's nothing in the making of this film that he's adding to it.
Yes.
He can only create noise with his camera in some way or get in an actor's eye line
Yes.
in an important scene. And so it's only in the marketing of a film that you become very important.
Brando said something once which I just read because I didn't know him, and he said that what he liked to do many times is he would get into a conversation with either the camera operator or the boom guy or even the focus guy on the camera, and he would be talking to him, and then they would say, okay, we're ready to go, and he says, go ahead, go ahead. They would, you know, they'd do the thing. He would keep talking to them. He wanted to be able to go from the reality of what he was doing in conversing with the camera operator to the person he was talking to, so that there would be no scrim, there would be no difference. And I've never forgotten that. Even if he's then doing some, you know, that he had a certain, so what'd you do last weekend? Really? Yeah. So anyway, you know, why'd you try to kill me? So that it had a reality that didn't shift. And I thought that was brilliant. So I would think if you shot him in The Godfather, which you did, I would think he wouldn't have been bothered if you were in his eye line.
The first day that I photographed him, Brando, I had heard he was in bad health. And also we had this idea that we did not want people to photograph him because we didn't want that image to come out until the film came out. So I walked on the set and I saw this very old man with a hat who really looked in bad health. And I suddenly realized that was Brando. I'm saying, oh my word, it's really true. He's not in good health. And he sort of turned to an assistant director and he started talking like this. And I said, oh wow, this is not a good situation. He's really not in good shape. And he kept talking like this. And then he sort of turned to this whole crowd behind him because the streets were filled with people. And he sort of turned to them, and I saw suddenly this like electricity shoot out of his eyes, this enormous energy pop out. And he turned back and in sort of on the waterfront lingo said, I think there's someone with a camera out there. And I really felt, wow, I've seen the real Marlon Brando.
Don Corleone, give me justice. You come into my house and you ask me for murder.
I ask you for justice.
That is not justice. I never wanted this for you. I worked my whole life. I don't apologize to take care of my family. And I refused to be a fool. Dancing on the string held by all those big shots.
It's not personal. It's strictly business.
Francis Coppola was very smart, and he also knew that Brando could improvise almost anything. And so we were shooting in Filmway Studio in New York, and there were these stray cats roaming around. So while we were in the office scene, suddenly Coppola picked up one of the cats and threw it on Brando's lap, with the idea that Brando would figure out what to do with this, which he did. And it became sort of an image for the film. But I've noticed that really, in terms of the film, you really never see the cat in that same way. And my photo of the cat, which is not a moment that's in the film, became sort of like an icon for the film. I just saw the film again, and the whole scene of whispering in Brando's ear is not really shot in a way that I photographed it. So basically, I was lucky in doing two images which became very important for the film and became sort of iconic images for the film, which are not actually in the film or are not shot that way.
The history of two generations of crime. The drama of absolute power and the men who violate it. The Godfather, Part 2.
What is your name?
Don Vito Corleone and his son, Michael. Both had seen the ones they loved most cut down before their eyes.
And you've won. You want to wipe everybody out?
I don't feel I have to wipe everybody out, Tom. It's just my enemies.
The thing with The Godfather, I mean, the classic pictures I did were all in the office. I mean, Brando with the cat and the whisper, and that was a very quiet set. So the big problem you have is the possibility of making any kind of noise. You know, you used a blimp, which covered all the sound, but it allows you to work, you know, in a situation where you don't have to ask the first assistant director afterwards, can we set up a still?
Yes.
And actors generally don't want to do that because, you know, they've just done it, and to do it for the still camera, forget it.
We've sold the casinos. All businesses having to do with gambling. We have no interests or investments in anything illegitimate.
Don Corleone. The Corleone family. Partners with the Pope. They may cry blasphemy.
This is business.
I went to Italy, to Sicily, to do an ad for Godfather 3 with Al Pacino. And we got an idea of what we wanted to shoot. They were shooting in a library right over here, and we decided there was this hallway with this great light coming through, which would make a great ad for the movie. So I and my crew came at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we set up, and we did all the lighting. We had a strobe light off to the side just to light up Al's face, and the rest of it was all natural light coming in through this wonderful window, this wonderful golden light. And so we set up and we waited for Al, and we waited, and we waited, and we had lunch, and we were still waiting, and finally at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we got Al. Okay, so we got Al, but all this light was gone, and there was just hardly any light coming in through there. So what I had to do was to do a long exposure. So I had to do like a 4-second exposure. Now, Al Pacino is not the type of person who is going to sit in a chair for 4 seconds or for 4 minutes or for anything like that. He tends to move very quickly and all. So we started to shoot. The strobe went off, and Al would immediately get up and move to another position, thinking we were done with that picture and would do another. And so my whole first roll was double exposed. I had 2 images of Al because I had this one and that one. And finally, we explained to Al what was happening, that in order to get this golden light coming through on the floor, we had to do a long exposure. And we cut it down to 3 seconds, and so he understood it, and we were able to get the picture. And this is a totally unretouched picture, except that we took out a reflection of the strobe light right here. Outside of that, it's all natural, just the way we shot it. And it became the teaser ad for Godfather 3. And a picture I'm happy with.
We did 2 books with Steve so far, one on Godfather. He photographed all the 3 movies as a set photographer, and on Taxi Driver. That was the second one. People trust him from the first moment on. That was always my observation. So that was the only way how he could get all these iconic photos on the set of Godfather and Taxi Driver, but as well, I think, on dozens of other movies. Yeah.
Second call, 404 Allen, 417. 195. Alfano, 448.
De Niro. In Bang the Drum Slowly, the critics called him a brilliant new talent. Under Mean Streets, they said he was a genius. For his performance in The Godfather Part 2, they gave him the Academy Award.
Come on, man. Get me out of here, all right? Come on!
Well, I guess I first met Martin Scorsese, I must have been 10 years old, maybe 11 years old. I came in and read for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. I ended up doing that film. I think Scorsese had me in mind when he was starting to prep for Taxi Driver. And I think we all thought he was a little crazy because I was sort of a tomboy, and I went to a private French school and wore a uniform to school, and I didn't really fit the bill as a young child prostitute, but I guess he saw the actress in me. Then I did Taxi Driver, and I met Steve Chapiro on set. He was their on-set photographer. And then as the years went on, he photographed me for different things. He came in to do special stills on films that I've done, and also just reportages for different magazines.
She was a 12-year-old actress who had basically done Disney family films before this. And here she was playing the part of a street hooker and doing it in such a way that a seasoned, mature actress could not have done better in terms of the way she just handled the part.
Well, it was interesting doing Taxi Driver because I had made a lot of films, and I'd done a lot of Disney films. I'd done a lot of television. I've been working since I was 3 years old. And I thought that acting, honestly, was a pretty dumb job. I thought that it really was about saying lines that someone else wrote and memorizing those lines and delivering them with the most natural, style as possible, because that's what was asked of me. People would come in and they would say, be natural, be yourself. And every once in a while, they would tell me what they were looking for, as in, we want you to be sad, or we want you to be happy. And I thought, well, this is not something that I'm going to do when I'm going to grow up, because I'll just be bored to death. It really wasn't until I did Taxi Driver, met Martin Scorsese, and especially Robert De Niro, who kind of took me under his wing and really taught me that it was much more than that, and that it was about building a character. And suddenly it was this sort of eureka moment at 12 years old where I realized that in some ways I hadn't, up until that moment, I hadn't really given enough, that I had stayed on the surface of this profession, and that it really was this amazing creative job that was not only enough for me, but was going to challenge me in ways that I had never been challenged in my life. And it was mostly through working with Robert De Niro.
Getting ready, getting organized, preparing himself for the only moment in his life that will ever mean anything.
How much for everything? $350 for the Magnum, $250 for the 38, $1.25 for the 25, $150 for the 380.
That taxi driver's been staring at us.
When an actor like De Niro has become the part itself and has become Travis Bickle, it becomes easy for Scorsese to say something, and just to have him improvise a moment. And so one of the most famous moments and one of the most famous lines in movies now is, "You talking to me? You talking to me?" And actually, all that comes from Scorsese saying to De Niro, say something, say whatever you want. And that's what came out of it.
You talking to me? You talking to me? Well, then who the hell else are you talking to? Talking to me? Well, I'm the only one here. Who the fuck do you think you're talking to? Oh, yeah? Huh?
To prepare for Taxi Driver, Robert De Niro, who is a consummate performer and who really works to get the insides and the outsides of his character down so completely, had spent a month driving a taxi cab in New York just to get into the spirit and to get into the feel of what that was like. When we worked on the film, even when he was off camera, he would tend to maintain the character he had created.
Yeah, people do anything in front of a taxi driver. I mean anything. People too cheap to rent a hotel room.
Oh, driver, hurry up, will you?
People want to embarrass you. It's like you're not even there. It's like, you know, like a taxi driver doesn't even exist. This city here is like an open sewer, you know? It's full of filth and scum.
I think I know what you mean, Travis. But it's not going to be easy.
My sister was brought in on the film because at the time, in the early 70s, there were some problems. I think people were concerned that child actors were being put in these, you know, films that had adult themes, and that somehow that this was going to scar them emotionally. So the Board of Education came to us and were trying to stop me from being able to act in the film because the film was very much an R-rated film with very adult themes. And there was sexuality in terms of my character, and they thought that somehow, psychologically, I would be damaged. And the lawyer basically negotiated with the Board of Education and said, well, you know, if we make sure that she has a stand-in or a double who does any of the shots where there's any kind of real sexual contact, you know, will that help you out? And they said, yes, that's what we'll do. We'll bring in a double who's over 18 and who's, you know, a consenting person that can just fill in for her on shots where you see the back of her head and that kind of thing. So my mom very smartly said, well, my daughter has the same hair color and is about the same size. Can we bring her in, my other daughter? And I think my sister was probably 18 or 19. Maybe she was even 20. So they brought her in, and I got to have this amazing summer with my sister. I never got to go to work with my sister, so I got to have this great time with my sister, and she was dressed up the same as me, and her hair was cut the same as me. And, you know, we went to work together.
How do you guys get to be a Secret Service man? What? I was just curious, because I thought maybe I'd make a good one. Hey, what kind of guns do you guys carry? 38s, 45s, 357 Magnums, something bigger maybe?
The 60s, in which I started doing documentary photography, was considered the golden age of photojournalism. This was certainly for America one of the golden ages of movie making in terms of just the dimensions and the depth of the films that were being made. I was very lucky to work on some of the best movies of that time: Godfather, Godfather 2, Taxi Driver, Chinatown. All of these turned out to be major movies at a particular time, which was a great period.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lenny Bruce.
How do you people really feel about doing it? Isn't that about the dirtiest thing we could do to each other?
He was a comic, a cynic, a satirist, a criminal, a genius.
Stop. You don't have to applaud. Really, it's really weird. It's enough that you're just listening. You know, it's so strange. I used to get fired for doing this. And, like, now I'm getting a following, right?
He was called funny, filthy, honest, obscene, brilliant, sick.
You know, I've been thinking. I mean, I am totally corrupt.
Dustin Hoffman, Lenny, a Bob Fosse film.
This shot is from Lenny, and what's interesting about it is that Bob Fosse asked me to do a dance turn, and I'm certainly not a dancer, and it was when I was coming down the hallway to knock on the door and see Valerie Perrine, the girl I'm in love with. And here's Fosse standing in a corner, always with his ever-present cigarette in his mouth. But, you know, he was one of the great choreographers in the American theater, and he's trying not to be seen, but he had already helped me through a series of moves, which I never really could fully realize.
Just a minute.
And of course, this is me being naughty, and I've been naughty ever since I can remember. Why not?
So the funny thing about Dustin is just before he did this movie, his aunt was having a nose job. And she asked him, well, do you want to do a twofer? And so it was a question of whether Dustin would have his nose done before he did any of these movies. Fortunately, he didn't. Because again, what we talked about before is the unique qualities which make someone special. And the more unique you look, the better. You have all these actors who want to be like Brad Pitt and things like that. And, you know, they think, wow, I just look like him, I'm going to be fine. That's not at all true. Danny DeVito's a big star. He doesn't look anything like Brad Pitt. The whole thing is to find your unique self. Dustin could change characters, but the one thing that Dustin has is this incredible sense of humor. He has this relaxed sense which he brings into all his films, regardless of what they are. And this is just a picture I always liked, in a way.
This, I think, would be around the same time.
Yes. It's the same time as Midnight Cowboy.
And what's remarkable about it is that this was before I got my nose job. And I'm so glad I got my nose job because I wouldn't have had a career otherwise.
It was a big moment.
Hello, gorgeous.
You're going to be a big star someday, Miss...
Bryce, Fanny Bryce.
In her Academy Award-winning film debut.
The whole world will look at me and be stunned.
From legendary four-time Oscar-winning director William Wyler.
I worked with Barbra Streisand from the first clap of the clapboard, the very first scene on Funny Girl. Barbra is someone who really has a good sense of what's right for her, and she's been very, very successful in her career because she's always stood up for that and always maintained her sense of what would work for her and avoided things that wouldn't work for her. So one day on Funny Girl, William Wyler, who is a very, very renowned director, was doing a scene with Barbra, and he had lit the scene. Barbra, from her stage career, had the sense of knowing when the lighting was right for her by the heat of the lamps. And she felt that this was not working right. She felt that the lighting was not the way she should be photographed, and she was very sensitive in terms of how she should be photographed. And so she told Wyler, no, that the lighting wasn't right. And he kept insisting, no, no, this is what we should do. And basically, Barbra walked off the set. And they lost half a day of shooting because Barbra had a strong sense of what was right for her and stood up for it against someone who was a very, very renowned director.
Wouldn't it be lovely if we were old? We'd have survived all this. And everything would be uncomplicated and easy, like it was when we were young.
Katie, it was never uncomplicated. You mustn't be too serious.
I won't be. I won't be.
So it's the laughter we will remain.
I worked on The Way We Were with Streisand and Redford. And in the middle of it, Barbra decided that she wanted to do a series of pictures for Harper's Bazaar. And so we shot this picture, which then became the album cover for The Way We Were, with the turban and the nail polish. What Barbra was incredibly inventive in terms of the images she would come up with for record album covers and just in terms of ideas. She always preferred her left side, and she always wanted that to be the side to be photographed. But sometimes I would take a picture from her right side, which was really terrific. And I would really like the picture, so I would show her the transparency because she had approval on all pictures, and I would flip it so that it looked like it was the left side of her face, and usually I would get it approved, which I really loved because it worked out for everyone.
Katie, what are you selling?
Stop! The ROTC, you can have it cheap. Fascist.
2 hamburgers, 2 cheeseburgers, and 4 Cokes.
Onion.
Yeah, in the Cokes.
I worked on a film called Main Event. I arrived probably in the 3rd week of the shooting, and Barbra came running up to me and she said, I know what a director is for. A director is for when I can't make up my mind. And it's absolutely true. She absolutely was strong in her opinions of how a scene should go, of how it should be acted, and she was invariably right about all of that.
I think Hollywood called him because stars, they want to look good. And he had the rare talent to make this happen, to make this work, and to make them look in a private environment. The stars felt safe with him, and that's the key for all of it, yeah? And if you feel safe, then you relax and you can take great pictures if you're a great photographer. But to make a star or any human being feel safe, I think that's the first step.
The first time we worked together was on a picture I made in Chicago that took place in 1930s with Johnny Depp. It was called Public Enemies. And he did one shot of Johnny Depp's coming out of a Depression-era farmhouse, and I was operating the camera, and I was walking holding a camera. And that shot feels like what it feels like to walk and hold the camera. I can't say it any other way, but I am right back looking through that lens and not seeing where I'm going and just walking, you know, and somehow managing not to trip, you know, but just that, you know, that concentration. It just feels like exactly how I felt when I was concentrating on the shot, you know.
We grew up in the same period and the same cultural events as Steve. So for us, there's a lot of images that are very iconic. They evoke a sense of place, a sense of purpose, a place and time. I don't know for someone who didn't live in that period if they do it so strongly, but they do it very strongly for us. But I have to say, of all the stills and still photographers for movies that I've seen, he does the best job of capturing what it's like to be on the set making the film, which has its own excitement and its own chemistry. Yeah. When I look at his stills, it's like being on the set.
You don't get that sense of somebody who's part of what becomes a very unique team, and that's what happens when you're on a film. And because of an emotional, we're all in the same emotional space when you're making a film. It doesn't matter if it's Rosemary's Baby or you know, Taxi Driver or Godfather, everybody is imbued, down to the camera operator, they're all imbued with the vibe of that moment. It's a collective kind of spiritual connection that we have without being conscious about it. I mean, no one's standing around a circle saying, "Oh," I mean, no one's, you know, but it is all, it's there. It's tactile, and Steve inserts himself so deeply that he becomes part of it. That's what Summer means.
He'll shoot a person, but he's able to bring some of the context in to enhance what's of value to that person at that moment in time. That's what I find kind of unusual, is those associations he can make. So he isn't just recording, he's enhancing what it is that he sees that is special. And I think that takes another step that a lot of documentary photographers don't. They're recording and he's enhancing, but he's also not putting his thing in. It's a recognition, it's an attention. He doesn't like give himself assignments. He takes a camera wherever he goes. He always has a camera, and something will capture his attention, and then he'll shoot. But at the same time, he might decide to get in the car and drive someplace, hoping to come to something that he's curious about. So even though he's got the technique and the artistry, and those are very mature, he's also really adaptable. I think on Public Enemies is when he went over to digital. So just in the process of, you know, I've started shooting color, maybe I'll try digital, and then he rented a camera and he started shooting and he talked to other guys, and then now he's facile that way. He doesn't confine himself.
Another thing that Summer's talking about, that it's not, he leaves things irresolved. The function of that is that you feel that you can take one more step in. He's not saying, I want you to see this like that, and that's a very special function.
Hi, we're back. So glad you're still with us. Another thing I think that makes for a good photograph are three main elements, which are design, emotion, and information. Emotion to me is by far the most important because it gives you a sense really of the spirit of someone, the spirit of an event, and that's what you're after. Design makes your picture a better picture, although many pictures work just on terms of a level of design. And information really tells you gives you a sense of where things are at. But basically, it's like a question of why do we respond to things? You know, what makes us respond to photographs or to art or to movies in such a way that we feel really emotionally involved with them? And this happens, and I don't know the answer to it.
Before you say thank you, I want to thank you for this opportunity, because it's an honor for me to have worked with you all these years, and I mean
my
that.
word, it is such my pleasure. It's amazing. It's so nice of you, really.
No, really, and I would have done this even if you weren't giving me the Mercedes.
It's not a Mercedes, it's a Bentley.
No, it was a BMW.
Yeah, but this has gone so well that we've upped it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve.
Oh, thanks so much.